Good evening, all. Today we'll be dealing with thyroid and the surgery. Okay, the most common disorder or abnormality of thyroid which we will deal with is hyperthyroidism. Okay, the most common thyroid disorder that we're going to deal is hyperthyroidism. This may be a essay question for you people in your final examination. So coming to the surgical anatomy of the thyroid, this itself can be a 5-mark question. So what are the questions that is probably can be asked are, what are the vertebrae that lies behind the thyroid gland? Okay, so the thyroid gland extends from the C5 vertebra, the fifth cervical vertebra, to the T1 vertebra. Okay, so here you can see the hyoid bone coming up to the thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage. These are the three cartilages and bony structures which we are going to deal with: hyoid bone, thyroid cartilage, and the cricoid cartilage. And of course, the thyroid gland itself is divided into three lobes. Okay, right lobe, left lobe, and isthmus of thyroid. The right lobe, left lobe, and isthmus of thyroid. And an additional lobe, also called as pyramidal lobe, that extends from the isthmus of thyroid. Okay, there are right lobe, left lobe, isthmus, and pyramidal lobe. Okay, and extension of tracheal ring is also more important. The isthmus extends from the second tracheal ring to the fourth tracheal ring, sometimes the first tracheal ring. So importance of this is that if anything going beyond this surgical landmarks, anatomical landmarks, is considered to be thyroid gland enlargement. Okay, if the apex of the thyroid gland goes beyond C4 or C5 or C4, it is called as enlargement of thyroid. If it enlarges behind T1, it is also enlargement of thyroid. If the isthmus along the extends beyond the fifth tracheal ring, this is considered to be thyroid gland enlargement. Okay, and another important structure called as levator glandulae thyroidae. Okay, this is a remnant of the thyroid gland. Okay, this is a remnant pathway from which the thyroid gland descends down. Okay, so important surgical anatomy of thyroid is that the thyroid gland extends from the C5 vertebra to T1 vertebra, and there are 4 lobes, that is right, left, isthmus, and pyramidal lobe. Okay, so coming to the normal weight of the thyroid gland. Okay, the normal weight of the thyroid gland ranges from 20 to 25 grams. This can be your PG MCQ question. The normal thyroid gland weighs about 20 to 25 grams. Okay, and the 2 lobes along with the isthmus, where it is located. Both the lateral lobes extend from the thyroid cartilage to the 5th or 6th tracheal ring, while the isthmus extends from the 2nd to the 3rd tracheal ring. So here we are reading about the extent of the thyroid. The lobes, right and left lobe of the thyroid, extends from the superiorly from thyroid cartilage to the inferiorly to 5th or 6th tracheal ring, while the isthmus is bounded superiorly by the 2nd tracheal ring and inferiorly by the 3rd or 4th tracheal ring. And of course, thyroid itself has 2 capsules. The one is called as true capsule, which lies inside, while the other is called as false outer capsule. This true inner capsule is formed by the condensation of fibrous stroma of the gland. Okay, it is formed by the gland itself. That is why it is called as true capsule, while the false capsule is formed by the pretracheal fascia that encloses the thyroid gland. The pretracheal fascia that encloses the thyroid gland and forms a outer false capsule. The other important structure we should know about is the Berry's ligament. Okay, why it is important? It is important because it connects the lobe of thyroid to the cricoid cartilage. The important sign that the thyroid gland that moves along with deglutition. This is because of the Berry's ligament connection with connecting the thyroid gland to the cricoid cartilage. Okay, so normal thyroid gland weighs about 20 to 25 grams, and the extent of the left and right thyroid lobe is from the thyroid cartilage superiorly, inferiorly to the fifth or sixth tracheal ring, while the extension of the isthmus is from the second tracheal ring to the third or fourth tracheal ring, and the thyroid contains two capsules. That is inner true capsule, which is formed by the condensation of the stroma of the gland itself, and outer false capsule is formed by the pretracheal fascia. And the Berry's ligament is a ligament that connects the thyroid to the cricoid cartilage. Is a ligament that connects the thyroid to the cricoid cartilage. So this is a cross-sectional image of neck. Okay, here you can see the relationship to the thyroid. What are the other relationship? Okay, anteriorly, this violet color structure is a thyroid gland, and this greenish layer that covers immediately the thyroid gland is the pretracheal fascia, also called as false capsule of the thyroid. So within the false capsule of thyroid lies the parathyroid gland. Okay, inside the false capsule, that is inside the pretracheal fascia, there is a gland called as parathyroid gland, which is bilaterally located, which is more important in calcium metabolism. Parathyroid gland is more important in calcium metabolism. So this is the other point why the pretracheal fascia is considered to be a false capsule, because it not only covers the thyroid gland, it also envelops the parathyroid gland, while the true capsule, which is a condensation of the stroma of the gland, that covers only the thyroid gland. Okay, so coming to the muscles, as a whole, they are called as trap muscles of neck. That includes sternohyoid muscle, sternohyoid muscle, omohyoid muscle, and sternocleidomastoid muscle. Okay, so the important muscles that comes anterior to the thyroid gland are sternocleidomastoid muscle, omohyoid muscle, and sternohyoid and sternothyroid. Okay, you can remember it very easily. Just anterior to the thyroid gland will be the sternothyroid, and anterior to the thyroid there will be the two hyoid muscles, omohyoid and sternohyoid, and anterior most is the sternocleidomastoid. Okay, so other important structure is the recurrent laryngeal nerve, which is the most common nerve to be injured during thyroidectomy. Okay, this is located in the tracheoesophageal groove. Okay, this recurrent laryngeal nerve is located in the tracheo. This light blue shade is the trachea, and this brownish structure is the esophagus. So it is located in the tracheoesophageal groove. There is a groove between the trachea and esophagus, outside the false capsule of thyroid. Okay, this is also an important structure. The most common nerve to be injured in thyroidectomy is recurrent laryngeal nerve. Okay, so we have seen about the pretracheal fascia, and there's another important fascia called investing layer of deep cervical fascia that covers the entire sternocleidomastoid and everything. Okay, and of course we'll have platysma muscle above it. Okay, and other vascular structures are that is related to the thyroid are external jugular vein, common carotid artery, vagus nerve, and the sympathetic trunk. Okay, the neurovascular bundle are related laterally and posteriorly, posterolateral to the thyroid. Okay, the relationship of neurovascular bundle is posterolateral to the thyroid glands. Okay, it includes external jugular vein, carotid, common carotid, vagus, and the three are surrounded by carotid sheet. Okay, the external jugular vein, common carotid artery, and the vagus nerve is surrounded by the carotid sheet, and this is the sympathetic trunk. Okay, cervical sympathetic trunk. And posteriorly, there is a fascia called as prevertebral fascia. That is, this fascia is the fascia that is located just anterior to the vertebra. Here, we have some vertebra. Okay, cervical vertebra will be here. C5 to T1 vertebra. That is where the thyroid gland extends. So just anterior to this vertebra, that will be fascia. This is called as prevertebral fascia. Okay. Okay. So this prevertebral fascia will continue as the deep investing layer of cervical fascia. Yeah. So this is a cross section of thyroid. This diagram itself can be a 5-mark question in your final exam. So coming to a little physiology about the thyroid, the most important hormone that is secreted by the thyroid gland is thyroxine. Okay, it is secreted in two forms, T3 and T4. Both these T3 and T4 are initially secreted binding with the thyroglobulin within the colloids. Inside the thyroid gland, the T3 and T4 are produced, and these T3 and T4 are bound to thyroglobulin, and these thyroglobulin bounded T3 and T4 are saved inside the colloid. Okay, so complex resorbed into the cells. Okay, this complex structure gets inside the cell. Okay, this complex structure of colloid, thyroglobulin bounded to the T3 and T4 is resorbed into the cell, is present within the cell, and within the cell, this thyroglobulin is broken down to release T3 and T4. Okay, the T3 and T4 are released in the bounded form along with thyroglobulin, and it is located within the colloid. And this complex structure is absorbed into the blood vessel and then into the particular cells where the receptors are present and where they are supposed to act. And inside the cell, this thyroglobulin will break down and release the hormones. So, as I said already, parathyroid hormone, it plays an important role in calcium metabolism in extracellular fluid. Okay. So, how extracellular fluid? Of course, calcium is an anion. Sorry, calcium is a cation, Ca2+. Okay. So when there is a positive charged ion, it will attract the OH. So extracellular fluid shifting will occur in case of electrolyte imbalance. This is how parathyroid hormone plays an important role in both calcium metabolism and in regulating the extracellular fluids. So other hormone released is calcitonin. Okay, this calcitonin is released from the parafollicular C cells of thyroid. Okay, the calcitonin is released from the parafollicular C cells of thyroid, while the thyroxine is released from the follicular cells of thyroid. Thyroxine from follicular cells, and calcitonin from parafollicular cells. Another important features we are supposed to know is pituitary thyroid axis and thyroid stimulating antibodies. In next few slides, we will see about the pituitary thyroid axis. So these are simple points which are supposed to know about T3 and T4. This can be asked in your Vivas and for case discussion. Okay, what is the total amount of thyroxine T3 secreted per day? It is around 30 micrograms per day. In case of T4, it is 80 micrograms per day. Here, the most active form is T3 rather than T4. In fact, the T4 will get converted into T3 and then will have its action. So T3 is the active form of thyroxine hormone. Okay, thyroid hormone. The source of T3 is directly from 20 to 25% by the gland. Okay, because only 30 micrograms is produced per day. So source of T3 will be 25% from the gland, while rest of the 80%, 75 to 80% is by the conversion of T4 to T3. As we said about 80 micrograms of T4 is produced, which acts by getting converted into T3. So as a whole, 80% of T3 is formed by the conversion of T4, while only 20 to 25% of T3 are produced directly from the thyroid gland. Why this is so? Because T3 has a very short half-life. This 20 to 25% of T3 that is produced by the gland will have a very short half-life of 1 day, while the T4 produced by the thyroid gland can be there for minimum the T of 7 days. It's so that it can be stored and get converted into T3 whenever it is required. So coming to the potency, T4 is of course potent, but T3 is 3 to 4 times more potent than T4. Okay, around 0.2% of T3 is unbound. Well, 0.002 is unbound in T4. Okay. So synthesis of thyroid hormone. This is the most important physiological question which I have already read about it. Okay. So initially I'll just brief it out. Thyroglobulin is synthesized and discharged into the follicle lumen. Okay. So these are the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Golgi apparatus. As you know, Golgi apparatus is for packing and synthesizing hormones. Here, the thyroglobulin is produced and it is secreted inside the colloid. So get into this image. These are the thyroid follicular cells, and this is the colloid. This yellow material is colloid, and this is thyroid follicular cells. So here the thyroid follicle cells synthesis the thyroxine T3 and T4, which gets binded to the thyroglobulin and gets released into the colloid. Okay, this complex structure, thyroglobulin colloid, that includes MIT, that is T1, and D8T, monoiodothyroid thyroxine, diiodothyroxine, T1 and T2, which combine together form triiodothyronine. This MIT plus D8T gives rise to T3, while two D8T joins to form T4. Okay, this is mediated by the iodinated toxic multinodular goiter, toxic nodules, and hyperthyroidism due to rare causes. So the rare causes for hyperthyroidism can be asked as a 2-mark question that includes thyrotoxicosis, Praxishan, the Joad-Basedow thyrotoxicosis, autoimmune thyroidotic, neonatal thyrotoxicosis, struma ovary, drugs like amiodarone. Amiodarone can cause thyrotoxicosis and carcinoma of thyroid. Okay, these are all the various conditions. These are all the various conditions or various pathological conditions that can cause increased T3, T4, which can manifest as hyperthyroidism. So coming to the diffuse toxic Graves' disease. Okay, diffuse toxic goiter, also called as Graves' disease, it is an autoimmune disease. Okay, here it is an autoimmune disease. The main etiology is that it will have autoantibodies to TSH receptors.
This session is no longer being recorded.
Autoantibody to TSH receptors. These autoantibodies will mimic the TSH receptor and will stimulate the thyroid gland to produce T3, T4. Okay, this causes primary thyrotoxicosis. Here, it is associated with the hyperplasia and hypertrophy of the entire thyroid gland because of the prolonged action of the TSH on the thyroid gland. Here, the autoantibody will mimic the TSH and will act on the TSH receptors and will stimulate the thyroid gland to produce T3 and T4. So, because of excessive stimulation, the gland will undergo hyperplasia and hypertrophy. Hence, it is called as goiter. Goiter is increase in size of the thyroid gland. So, what is hyperplasia? Hyperplasia means increase in the cell sizes, increase in cell number. While hypertrophy is increase in the size of the cell. Here, because of this excessive stimulation, both the thyroid cells, the cells located in thyroid gland, follicular and parafollicular cells, increase in size and also increase in number. And this Graves' disease can be a familial or genetic concept. Of course, because of the increased T3, T4, and it can manifest as a hyperthyroidism. This hyperthyroidism can present with some eye signs. Okay, so coming to that multinodular goiter. This multinodular goiter, toxic multinodular goiter. Okay, multinodular goiter can be of two types. Anything can be of two types. It can be non-toxic or toxic. It depends upon the secretion of T3. If it does not produce any T3 and T4. If the patient is euthyroid, it can be considered as a non-toxic multinodular goiter. Toxic multinodular goiter secretes T3 and T4 and causes hyperthyroidism. Okay, it is also called as Plummer's disease. This toxic multinodular goiter is also called as Plummer's disease. And this is common in middle age, and this is common in middle age and the elderly people due to toxicosis. As I said already, the nodules can be inactive, that is not toxic, or it can be overactive. These nodules, why does such nodules occur? These nodules occur because some area of the tissue can be overactive and some area can be inactive. Okay, here in overactive conditions there will be hypertrophy and hyperplasia, while the inactive tissues will not increase in size. This results in multinodularity. So, solitary nodular goiter. Okay, this can also be a toxic or non-toxic. In solitary overactive nodule, it is also can be a true toxic adenoma. Okay, it can be an autonomous nodule. A nodule that secretes, what does autonomous nodule means? It secretes T3 and T4 irrespective of TSH effect. Even if there is no thyroid stimulating hormone, this nodule will keep on producing T3 and T4. Here, there will be increased T3 than T4, and there will be no eye signs will be present in case of SNG thyroid. This is because why there is no eye signs? As there is higher T3 level, there will be a negative feedback mechanism. So that TRH and TSH, that thyroid releasing hormone and thyroid stimulating hormone level will be very low, so that the gland will be suppressed. So there will be no production of T3 and T4 from the rest of the gland, but this toxic nodule will keep on producing the T3, T4 because of its autonomicity. It produces on its own without responding to TSH. This is why it is called as autonomous nodular goiter also. Here, there is no eye signs because, and even the patient will not have any features of hyperthyroidism because the other rest of the area will not produce T3 because of negative feedback mechanism. So this is also an important question. The difference between the primary thyrotoxicosis and secondary thyrotoxicosis, which you will be seeing. In primary thyrotoxicosis, the symptoms of hyperthyroidism occurs first, followed by thyroid swelling. These symptoms of hyperthyroidism like eye signs, palpitation, weight loss, excessive hunger that occurs first, followed by thyroid swelling, while in case of secondary thyrotoxicosis, swelling occurs first, followed by symptoms. Here, in primary thyrotoxicosis, there will be a diffuse swelling. It may be firm or soft, while both lobules are involved. But in case of secondary thyrotoxicosis, single nodule will be involved or single lobe will be involved. So this is how we can memorize it easily or we can understand it easily. This primary thyrotoxicosis is an entire gland defect, while the secondary thyrotoxicosis is a single nodule defect. So a single nodule defect that produces T3 excess, which while the rest of the gland is normal, by negative feedback mechanism, the features will be suppressed. Hyperthyroidism will not occur at the earliest time. So the swelling appears first in the secondary thyrotoxicosis. In fact, in primary thyrotoxicosis, the clinical features will be more severe compared to the secondary thyrotoxicosis. In secondary thyrotoxicosis, the symptoms will appear after a long time. This is because of the negative feedback mechanism, as the rest of the thyroid gland is normal. And as I said already, eye signs and other features of hyperthyroidism will occur first in the primary thyrotoxicosis. It can also occur in secondary thyrotoxicosis, but relatively later stages. And as the primary thyrotoxicosis, that is Graves' disease, is considered to be an autoimmune disease, it can be associated with hepatosplenomegaly. As it is an autoimmune disease, it can be associated with hepatosplenomegaly, and also patient has a higher risk of developing other autoimmune diseases. In case of patient with primary thyrotoxicosis, as it is an autoimmune disease, patient may have hepatosplenomegaly. Also, the patient can have features of other autoimmune diseases also. In secondary thyrotoxicosis, cardiac features are more common. Okay, and the autoimmune disease can occur at any age. Usually, it occurs in the younger age group, while the secondary thyrotoxicosis occurs at elderly people. Here, as I said already, primary thyrotoxicosis involves the entire gland, while the secondary thyrotoxicosis involves the internodular tissue which are overactive. Okay. So coming to the clinical features of hyperthyroidism, we can divide it into symptoms and signs. Symptoms is what the patient says, and signs are what we elicit. So the patient with hyperthyroidism can have a complaint of tiredness, easy fatigability can be seen, and the patient will be emotionally liable. There will be heat intolerance. Of course, there will be a weight loss in spite of excessive appetite. patient will eat a lot, but patient will have a weight loss. This is because of increased basal metabolism of the patient, and patient will complain of palpitation. So coming to the signs which we can see in patient with hypothyroidism or tachycardia will be present, while the palm will be hot and moist. Because of increased basal metabolism, the body temperature will be high. So to compensate the body temperature, there will be a release of, there will be excessive sweating. That is why the patient's palm will be hot and moist, and other eye signs will be present like exophthalmos, lid lag retraction will be present. The patient will be agitated. Patient will be irritable in case of hyperthyroidism. He will not stand still. He will be doing something. He will get irritated easily. Okay. So other thing is that there will be thyroid swelling. There can be a neck swelling, which is a sign of hyperthyroidism, and then we bluey palpable or auscultable. Okay. So here comes the clinical features of Graves' disease, that is toxic diffuse goiter. Patient can present with exophthalmos and other eye signs. There will be goiter, excessive sweating will be there. Patient can present with tachycardia. This tachycardia is due to arrhythmia that is provoked by T3. And GI symptoms like nausea and diarrhea will be there. Why diarrhea? Because of increased metabolism, increased metabolic rate, there will be a fast transit of food from the esophagus to the anal canal. The mobility or motility of the GI tract, gastrointestinal tract, will also be very high. So patient will complain of diarrhea. And of course, this hyperthyroidism will affect the menstrual cycle also. Patient will have oligomenorrhea or even amenorrhea. And because of the excessive stimulation of the muscles and irritability and excitability, the muscle weakness can occur, and patient will also have tremor. Patient will also have tremor. And other features of Graves' disease are headache, loss of weight, nervousness, and emotional instability or emotional liability. So what are the eye signs that can be seen in hyperthyroidism? Lid retraction. Okay, lid retraction, Von Graffi sign, Darlimpel sign, Stellwag sign, Geoffroy sign, Mobius sign, Jelinek sign, and Nafziger sign. So lid retraction. Why does lid retraction occur in this hyperthyroidism? Because of the sympathetic overactivity. Because of the sympathetic overactivity, the involuntary smooth muscles will get spasm, will undergo spasm. The involuntary smooth muscle that is present in the eyelids are levator palpebrae superioris. So because of the spasm, this muscle contracts. As this muscle contracts, the upper eyelid goes above. As the levator palpebrae superioris contracts, the upper eyelid goes above. Okay, this is the reason why lid retraction occurs. Clinically, how you will detect lid retraction? Clinically, the upper part of the cornea will be visible. Usually, the upper part of the cornea will not be visible in normal person. In lid retracted person, the upper part of the upper border of the cornea will be visible. So, what is Von Graffi sign? It is also called as lid lag sign. It is also called as lid lag sign. If a patient is asked to rotate his eyeball and see below, if the patient is asked to see his belly or see his foot without tilting his head, his eyes will go down. While the eyes or cornea is directed downwards, the eyelid will also come down. That is normal physiology. In Von Graffi sign, there will be a lid lag sign. That is, the lid will not come down. It will be there only. It will be fixed in the upper portion itself. The inability of the upper eyelid to keep pace with the eye. Okay, that is called as Von Graffi sign. Next, Darlimpel sign is that upper eyelid retraction, that is visibility of the upper sclera. That is the upper margin of the cornea and sclera is also visible. That is called as Darlimpel sign. Of course, all the signs are interrelated and will be quite similar to each other. And Stellwag sign, there will be a staring look of this patient. Stellwag sign means the patient will have a starry look. Okay, Geoffroy signs mean absence of wrinkles in the forehead. the wrinkles present in the forehead will be absent. That is called as Geoffroy sign. And Mobius sign is that lack of convergence of the eyeball. If you just bring your hand towards the root of the nose, the convergence of the eyeball will occur in normal person. But these person will find it difficult and they will move the head backwards to focus your hand. When you bring your hand or finger towards the root of the root of the nose of the patient, the eyeballs cannot converge for this patient, so that they will move their head backwards to focus your finger. This lack of convergence of eyeball is called as Mobius sign. Or notice Jelinek sign. This is an increased pigmentation of eyelid margins. Eyelid margins will have increased pigmentation. அந்த பழைய படத்துல வில்லன்லாம் வருவாங்கல்ல, கண்ணுக்கு மை போட்ட மாதிரியே இருப்பாங்களே, that is called as Jelinek sign. And Nabziger sign. Here, the patient is asked to sit and with the neck fully extended. Okay, here the patient is asked to sit with the neck fully extended, and we should see the examiner should see from this chin, the eyeball will be seen protruding out. Okay, Nabziger sign is that patient will be asked to sit down in a chair and will fully hyperextend his neck. So, on examining his face, plane of his face, his eyes will be protruded out. So, what are the cardiac manifestations of hyperthyroidism? Patient will have tachycardia. So, important clinical thing which you have to notice in hyperthyroidism is sleeping pulse rate. Usually, in normal persons, the sleeping pulse rate will be lower than the average pulse rate in the morning. So, based on a Krell's grading, the sleeping pulse rate is divided into 3 grades: grade 1, 2, and 3. Grade 1 is less than 90, grade 2 is 90 to 110, grade 3 is more than 110. This describes the severity of hyperthyroidism. If the patient has grade 3, he has a severe features of hyperthyroidism. This is what it means, Krell's criteria for sleeping pulse rate. Usually, we will measure the sleeping pulse rate by 2 a.m. In our wards, we will be measuring our sleeping pulse rate by 2 a.m. Okay, and ectopic beats will be present because of arrhythmias produced by thyroid hormone or hyperthyroidism, and pulses paradoxicus will be present. There will be a wide pulse pressure. The difference between the systolic and the diastolic will be very wide, will be more. There will be a multiple extra systolic beats will be present, and patient can present with paroxysmal atrial tachycardia, atrial fibrillation, and persistent atrial fibrillation. This is because of the arrhythmias produced by the arrhythmias that is provoked by the hyperthyroidism. And myopathies. What will be the effect of thyroid hormone, or what are the manifestation of hyperthyroidism in muscles? This causes proximal muscle weakness. Note this point. There will be proximal muscle weakness than the distal muscle weakness. Weakness is more when the muscle contracts isometrically. Here the weakness will be more when the muscle contracts isometrically. Okay. Here this resembles the myasthenia gravis. This will resemble the myasthenia gravis when severe. So you know all about myasthenia gravis, I suppose. It is also an autoimmune disease. Here the myopathy induced by hyperthyroidism in severe condition will mimic the myasthenia gravis. So this pretibial myxedema is also an important 5-mark question. This pretibial myxedema is nothing but is a dermopathy. It occurs in the tibial region. Here it is a thyroid dermopathy. There will be a extra skin thickening in that region, pretibial region. Nothing. Okay. Pretibial myxedema is nothing but there will be a extra skin thickening in the pretibial region. This is due to the deposition of the myxomatous tissues in the skin and the subcutaneous plane. There will be deposition of myxomatous tissues and glycosaminoglycans like hyaluronic acid in the skin and the subcutaneous plane that will result in skin thickening. This more commonly occurs in the pretibial region. So it is called as pretibial myxedema. So what is thyroid acropathy? Thyroid acropathy means nothing but it is the thickening of the extremities. as said previously, the myxomatous tissues and the glycosaminoglycans like hyaluronic acid gets deposited in the skin and the subcutaneous tissues in the extremities is called as thyroid acropathy. So this will present as clubbing. Okay, this can present as clubbing or soft tissue swelling or even periosteal newborn formation. So the thyroid acropathy can present as clubbing or soft tissue swelling and periosteal newborn formation even. So what are the investigations you will go for in case of hyperthyroidism? As usual, first we will go for routine investigations like complete blood count, RFT, LFT, everything will be going forward. And then we will specifically go for thyroid function test. Thyroid function test includes investigating free T3, free T4, and free TSH, and serum T3, T4, CSH. This is a thyroxine hormone that is freely present in the blood supply, in the blood vessels, and also the bounded thyroxine and T4 levels. Okay, these are things which you are supposed to see: free T3 and free T4, and bounded T3 and bounded T4, along with TSH. And other radioisotope studies like I-131 is used here. Iodine 131 is used for diagnostic purpose. So what will we see here? When iodine 131 is injected or it is given in some means into the body, it gets absorbed into the thyroid gland for thyroid T3 production. This can be, being a radioisotope, it releases radiation which can be captured by imaging. Okay, this is used for diagnosing autonomous solitary toxic knowledge which is impalpable. Okay, and TRH estimation, that is thyroid releasing hormone estimation, and ECG for cardiac abnormalities, and thyroid antibodies estimation for any Graves' disease, and of course total count and neutrophil count is also done. So how to evaluate thyrotoxicosis? So follow this chart. Initially we should go for TSH. Okay, if TSH alone, just go for TSH alone, well, there is a T3 and T4 is normal. When T3 and T4 is normal, and if only TSH is affected or altered, it is called a subclinical condition. If T3 and T4 is high and TSH is low, what it will be? If TSH is low, we will consider the condition where thyroid stimulating hormone is low, but T3 and T4 is normal. T3 and T4 is normal, but thyroid stimulating hormone is low. This means subclinical hyperthyroidism. Okay, this is called a subclinical hyperthyroidism. Similarly, if TSH is high, while T3 and T4 are normal, T3 and T4 are normal, while TSH is high, it is called subclinical hypothyroidism. So measurement of TSH is more important initially, and you will go for free T4 because free T4 constitutes around 80% of T3 production. If TSH is low and T4 is high, then it is primary hyperthyrotoxicosis. That is, hyperthyroidism is present in this case because TSH is low and T4 is high in initial stage. Okay, if TSH is low and T3 and T4 is high, it is called as primary thyrotoxicosis. If TSH is low and T4 is normal, then you should go for free T3 examination. If free T3 is high, it is also called as primary thyrotoxicosis or T3 thyrotoxicosis. If T3 is normal, T3 and T4 is normal, but the TSH is alone low, then it is considered subclinical hyperthyroidism. Just follow up the patient, that is more than enough in this case. If TSH is normal, while T3 and T4 are high, T3 and T4 are high, it can be due to pituitary adenoma or thyroid hormone resistance syndrome. That is, the negative feedback mechanism is affected in thyroid hormone resistance syndrome. If all are normal, then patient is euthyroid. Okay, so coming to the first thing, when TSH is low and T3 and T4 is high, it is considered to be a primary thyrotoxicosis. And if it is diagnosed to be primary thyroid toxicosis, we should clinically examine the patient whether the signs of hyperthyroidism are present. If yes, it is diagnosed to be a Graves' disease. In Graves' disease, you should go for autoantibody diagnosis also, autoantibody investigation also. And if there is no features of Graves' disease, we should detect whether there is a multinodular goiter or toxic adenoma. Because here in multinodular goiter, the symptoms will present very later. If there is no symptoms is present, it is Graves' disease. If no symptoms is present, it is nodular disease of thyroid. Okay. If nodular disease of thyroid is present, it can be of two types. After doing radionuclide isotope study, you can diagnose whether there is a nodules are present or there is no uptake of radiation. If there is no uptake of iodine, it can be of two things. It can be destructive thyroiditis. The thyroid gland will get inflamed. It will produce increased amount of T3, T4, and it will go autolysis. Because of increased working, it undergoes autolysis. It will get exhausted. This is called destructive thyroiditis. And iodine excess. If there is iodine excess in the body, radionuclide iodine will not be taken up by the thyroid gland. Okay, if there is no radioisotope uptake, should rule out other causes of hyperthyroidism. As you also know, if there is any stroma ovary or any ectopic location of thyroid hormone, thyroid gland, these are all the things which you have to locate. This is the image of radioisotope study. Here you will be using I-131. This is normal uptake of thyroid. Okay. In Graves' disease, you can find an increased uptake in both lobes. In toxic multinodular goiter, you can see that increased uptake in particular. It looks like nodules. There will be increased uptake in particular regions. There will be nodules here. So in toxic adenoma, nodular normal space. Here there will be normal space. Here is also normal space. Here is also normal space. In toxic adenoma, there will be a single uptake. Okay. So coming to the treatment of hyperthyroidism, you can go for anti-thyroid drugs. As we know about carbimazole, methimazole, etc. And surgery like total thyroidectomy or subtotal thyroidectomy, depending upon the etiology, and followed by radioiodine therapy. So what are the anti-thyroid drugs we all know? Carbimazole, methimazole, and propylthiouracil, beta blockers, and leucotriene. These carbimazole and methimazole are the anti-thyroid drugs. Of course, the methimazole will get converted into carbimazole and will act on it. And what is the importance of propylthiouracil is that this propylthiouracil also prevents the peripheral conversion of T4 to T3. The importance of propylthiouracil is that it prevents the conversion of T4 to T3 also, peripheral conversion of T4 to T3. It can be safely used in pregnancy too. While these carbimazole and methimazole cannot be used in pregnancy. This beta blocker, what are the use of beta blocker here? In hyperthyroidism, there will be sympathetic overactivity. It can cause palpitation, tachycardia, etc. These beta blockers will prevent the sympathetic activities, will reduce the sympathetic activity, and also the manifestation of increased sympathetic activity like palpitation and increased blood pressure. Tachycardia will also be controlled by beta blockers. Of course, glucosidein, it also has a negative feedback mechanism. It also helps in shrinking of the thyroid gland. It reduces the vasculature of the thyroid gland. So individually we should know about each drugs. This carbimazole will act by blocking the thyroid hormone synthesis. Okay, it will directly block the thyroid hormone synthesis. It is also used in autoimmune disease. The dose of carbimazole will be 5 to 10 milligram every 8th hourly. Okay, every 8th hourly, carbimazole will be given at a dose of 5 to 10 milligram. And as said already, methimazole will get converted inside our body into carbimazole and will block the thyroid hormone synthesis. This propylthiouracil, this acts by blocking the thyroid hormone synthesis, similar to the carbimazole and methimazole, but also it has a special property of inhibiting the peripheral conversion of T4 to T3, which is the active form. Okay, so this propylthiouracil will have an additional effect of preventing the peripheral conversion. Also, it decreases the autoantibody levels. This can be given safely in children and in pregnant ladies and lactating women, while the carbimazole and methimazole cannot be used in pregnant women or in lactating women. The dose of propylthiouracil is 200 mg 8 hourly. The dose of carbimazole is 5 to 10 mg 8 hourly, while that of propylthiouracil is 200 mg 8 hourly. So beta blockers, as said, this also reduces the cardiac problems by reducing the sympathetic overstimulation, and it also blocks the peripheral conversion of T4 to T3. The commonly used beta blocker is propranolol, the dose of 40 mg TDS, that is thrice daily. The commonly used beta blocker is propranolol at 40 mg TDS. Okay, leucocytin, it contains 5% iodine with 10% of potassium iodide. This leucocytin contains 5% of iodine with 10% of potassium iodide. This is given at the dose of 10 to 30 drops per day for 10 days prior to the surgery. Leucocytin is given at the dose of 10 to 30 drops per day for 10 days prior to surgery. So what is the effect of leukocytin is that it reduces the vasculature of the thyroid gland, so that the blood loss during the surgery will be very less. So advantages of medical management of hyperthyroidism is that it prevents the surgery related complication. The importance of or advantages of medical management of hyperthyroidism is that it reduces the surgery related complication and also avoids the radioiodine therapy. Of course, radioiodine therapy itself will have its own complication. But a disadvantage of medical treatment is that medical management is that there is a relapse rate of 40%. The 40% of person under medical treatment will get relapse, and the size of the neck swelling will not regress. This may cosmetically affect the patient. The neck swelling will present as it is, and because of the drug toxicity, the patient can present with agranulocytosis and thrombocytopenia. And of course, other signs of liver cell failure and hair loss can also be seen in this case. So coming to the surgical management of hyperthyroidism, what are the indications for surgery when the patient presents with hyperthyroidism? If the medical management fails, we will go for surgical management. If there is an autonomous toxic nodule, what is autonomous? Yeah, there will be a nodule which produces T3 and T4 irrespective of TSH level. This nodule will not be controlled by TSH level. That is called as autonomous toxic nodule. A nodular toxic goiter. Even malignancy. When malignancy cannot be ruled out, if the swelling is hard and it has a history of rapid growth and other features that is suggestive of malignancy, we should go for surgery. A Graves' disease in children, and the Graves' disease with multiple nodules in the thyroid gland. And if the patients are supposed to take antithyroid drug for more than 2 years, if there is no regression or patient is not responding to antithyroid drugs within 2 years, we should go for surgery because of the toxicity of the drug is more. That is why if the patient becomes normal within 2 years, we can go for medical management. If he is not responding, we should go for surgical management. If there is a large goiter, there is a swelling of neck is very big. There is a big swelling in the neck. It can have a substernal or intrathoracic extension. This intrathoracic extension can cause compression of the adjacent structure, which can produce complication. Hence, these large goiters should be operated and removed by surgery. On patient presenting with pressure symptoms like compression over the trachea or esophagus and recurrent laryngeal nerve compression, if patient presents with these kind of complaints, we are supposed to do surgery for this patient. And patient presenting with Graves' ophthalmopathy and amiodarone induced thyrotoxicosis is another condition where we are supposed to go for surgical management. So how we will prepare So surgical management is more important because before doing a surgery, we should do certain things to have a good outcome of surgery. Okay, so initially we'll go for thyroid function test. Surgery should be performed only if the patient is in euthyroid state. If you perform a surgery, if you perform a thyroidectomy in a person with a person in thyrotoxicosis or in hypothyroidism, then patient can land up with thyroid storm. And high resolution ultrasound is done to detect any nodule and any nodule and other features of malignancies, any calcification, and even lymph nodes if present in neck. And FNAC of the thyroid to be done to detect the histological variant of the swelling. And indirect laryngoscopy is done to detect the position of the larynx and the vocal cord. Because if the recurrent laryngeal nerve or any nerve infiltration like superior laryngeal nerve or recurrent laryngeal nerve is involved previously by the swelling in the neck, the patient may present with vocal cord palsy even before surgery. So the most common complication of surgery is that like recurrent laryngeal nerve injury, in which patient post-operatively can present with vocal cord palsy. So to detect whether the vocal cord palsy is due to the intraoperative complication or due to the swelling or due to the mass itself, we should go for indirect laryngoscope preoperatively. And serum calcium level. This is important to note to do because in while doing thyroidectomy, sometimes we may even lose our lose our parathyroid tissues also. In this situation, patient can go for a hypocalcemia and tetany. But there are some conditions. Patient can even present previously. Patient may even before surgery he may have hypocalcemia and tetany. Maybe a nutritional deficiency of calcium. So to detect whether it is due to the surgery or it is due to a nutritional deficiency, we should go for serum calcium level even before the surgery or inform the consent of all these things. The patient can go for tetany, patient can go for vocal cord palsy, patient can lose his voice even, patient can go for even tracheostomy. Lifelong tracheostomy can also be needed if the recurrent laryngeal nerve or both sides are injured. If both sides of recurrent laryngeal nerve are injured, the vocal cord will go for cadaveric position and patient have a higher risk of aspiration and there will be no voice. So patient should go for tracheostomy in this case. This because of surgical complication. So informed consent is more important in case of thyroid surgery. So how to render a patient euthyroid? As I said already, we cannot operate in patient with hyperthyroidism. So we should go for carbimazole 10 to 15 milligram 8 hourly, okay, for at least 4 weeks. 10 to 15 milligram of carbimazole 8 hourly for 4 weeks and propranolol 80 milligram 6 hourly for 1 week. Okay, this propranolol should be continued even after the surgery. Carbimazole after the surgery. This is an important point which you may be asked in your Viva. If a patient presents with hyperthyroidism and you are doing surgery, if even after surgery, whether we should continue carbimazole or propranolol. Here the answer is that carbimazole will act on the thyroid gland. So after thyroidectomy, there will be no use of taking carbimazole. Okay, but propranolol is necessary. It will be continued even up to 10 days after surgery because propranolol will prevent the conversion of T4 to T3 in the blood vessels and periphery. Even after doing thyroidectomy, the thyroxine hormone, that is T3 and T4 released inside the blood will be present because the half-life of T4 is 7 days. So after 7 days of surgery, even after 7 days, the T4 will be present. So to prevent the T4 getting converted into T3, we are going for propranolol. So levothyroxine. So this levothyroxine will reduce the vascularity of the gland, so that there will be intraoperatively there will be less bleeding. So the important side effect of this is constipation. Okay, thyroid constipation. What is thyroid constipation? Levothyroxine will, because of the reduced vascularity, the hormones cannot be released into the blood vessel easily. So that the thyroglobulin and colloid and T3, T4 will get accumulated inside the thyroid gland. This condition is called as thyroid constipation. So thyroid gland will produce T3 and T4, but it cannot release it into the bloodstream. This is called as thyroid constipation. This is because leukotriene decreases the vascularity of the gland. Okay, this effect will last for at least 2 weeks. Okay, this leukotriene effect will last for at least 2 weeks. So, what are the surgeries of choice? Usually, we will go for subtotal or near total thyroidectomy. Okay, near total thyroidectomy is preferred. And what is hemithyroidectomy? It is usually done in autonomous nodule. Only the nodule is done taken. Only one part of the gland, either a right lobe or a left lobe, along with the isthmus, is taken in case of hemithyroidectomy. Total thyroidectomy, the entire lobe is removed. In subtotal or near total thyroidectomy, if right lobe or left lobe is removed along with the isthmus, and the opposite lobe is also removed. If, for example, if there is we are going for a near total thyroidectomy with a patient lesion in the right lobe of thyroid, we will remove the right lobe entirely, and also we'll remove the isthmus, and around 10 milligrams of left lobe will be left alone. Okay, other areas will be removed. Only a small peanut-shaped lobe will be left. Thyroid gland will be left, while the other lobe will also be removed. In hemithyroidectomy, we will remove either right or left lobe along with the isthmus around. So either left or right lobe will remain as usual, as normal. So what is thyroid storm? The most important topic, another important 5-mark question for you, is you know that it is a life-threatening complication of hyperthyroidism. The thyroid storm is a life-threatening complication of hyperthyroidism. Okay, it occurs in a improperly treated case of hyperthyroidism. Okay, thyroid storm occurs in the improperly treated patient of hyperthyroidism. It is a life-threatening complication. Okay, what are the clinical features of thyroid storm? Here, the patient may present with tachycardia, hypertension, hyperthermia, and dyspnea, restlessness, and altered mental status, and diaphoresis. And also, patient can have acidosis. These are all the features of acidosis. So, how we will manage this life-threatening thyroid storm? Here we will go for IV infusion of beta blocker like propranolol. IV infusion of propranolol 1 to 2 milligram as a slow IV, or if patient is quite stable, we can go for oral propranolol of 80 milligram every 6th hourly, not 8 hourly here. Here we go for every 6th hourly, and potassium iodide 10 drops orally daily with propylthiouracil at the dose of 250 milligram orally for 6th hourly, and steroids like hydrocortisone 50 micrograms IV every 6th hourly. And also we should remove the T3 and T4 that is circulating in the blood by plasmapheresis or peritoneal dialysis. So coming to the radioiodine therapy, the indication for radioiodine therapy is the primary thyrotoxicosis after the age of 45 years. Usually the primary thyrotoxicosis is common in younger age group. Okay, if it occurs after 45, we should go for radioiodine therapy. In case of autonomous toxic nodules, and in case of recurrent thyrotoxicosis, we can go for radioiodine therapy. Here, radioiodine therapy, what it means, you will just go for iodine 123, which will be released which will by some means by oral intake or by IV injection. It enters into the circulation. This will be taken up by the thyroid gland for T3 and T4 production. When this radioactive iodine enters into the cells, it releases radiation and causes destruction of the thyroid cells. Okay, this is the mechanism how the radioiodine therapy acts. The dose will be 5 to 10 millicurie or 160 microcurie per gram of thyroid. For 1 gram of thyroid gland, around 160 microcurie or 5 to 10 millicurie is given. This is advised only after the age of 45 years. This radioiodine therapy is advised only after the age of 45. So what are the choices of therapy? As a summary for treatment, in case of diffuse toxic goiter, if it is small goiter, more than 45 years, you can go for antithyroid drugs alone for 18 months. In case of large goiter, that is in the age of less than 45 years, he can go for surgery, followed by radioiodine therapy. Okay. In case of toxic nodular goiter, we should go for thyroid surgery if the patient is in euthyroid state. In case of toxic solitary nodules, you can go for radioiodine if the patient is more than 45 years. If less than 45 years, you can go for surgery. Solitary nodule means hemithyroidectomy can be proceeded in this case. In case of recurrent thyrotoxicosis, even after surgery, if patient presents with thyrotoxicosis, then you should go for antithyroid drugs if the patient is less than 45 years, like carbimazole, methimazole, and leukotriene and propylthiouracil. If patient is more than 45 years, you should go for radioiodine surgery. And in case there is a failure of antithyroid drugs and radioiodine therapy, we should go for surgery. Okay. We should not only just focus on the neck region alone. There may be ectopic thyroid present anywhere in the body, and other things like struma ovary can also produce thyroxine hormone. We should also look for this, and we should go for surgery. So this comes the end of the session. Here I have given a brief note on hyperthyroidism and how the patient will present and how we will treat it. Okay, this is an important question in thyroid, and of course it can be separately asked about MNG thyroid and SNG thyroid in clinical discussion. In clinical discussion, you may get a case of solitary nodular goiter or multinodular goiter, even a diffuse goiter also. So, but maximum the discussion will be in hyperthyroidism and how we will proceed for surgery, how we will prepare the patient for surgery, what are the complications we are expecting like thyroid storm, how we will treat the thyroid storm. This will be the questions that can be asked in Viva, and of course in the theory exam even. Okay, guys. So let's complete the session by now. Any doubt, just message me in my WhatsApp or mail me. Okay. Thank you.